Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and today in What is Wednesday, we're going to be breaking down in plain English what is lit at lit.dev. If you've never heard of lit, this might be the first time you get an explanation. If you've heard of lit, this might be a way to have some of the topics broken down into plain English. Now, there's this big what is lit right here on their page, what is lit, and it says lit is a simple library for building fast and lightweight web components. So basically what lit is it's a framework on top of web components. We have other frameworks that are on top of things like a virtual DOM like React and Vue. Then you have things like Svelte that use just the DOM. And then you have things like lit that are basically a layer on top of web components. Now, if you don't know what web components are, we have a whole what is video on web components as well. But the quick explanation about web components is its components in the browser using only browser APIs. Now, that's a very simplified way of explaining them, considering there's things like the shadow DOM and explanations there. However, basically, web components are a way to build components in the web using only browser APIs. Now, why would you want to use lit then if browser APIs allow you to build web components? Well, the syntax for working with web components is not always the best, and it's not always easy, and especially if you're coming from React, Vue, Svelte, or Angular, coming to web components can feel like taking a giant step backwards. So in comes a library like lit that gives you the ability to have interactive, feature-rich apps, progressively enhanced basic HTML sites, shareable components or design systems, but on top of web components. Now, if we want to take a look at some of the syntax, this is largely what it looks like. You'll recognize some things as being JSX-like, where we have a template tag literal to do our templates, our HTML templates. We're using actual JavaScript string interpolation in here, so nothing fancy, right? It's just string interpolation inside of a backtick function. And then we have a render function, just like you might have within a React application. So at the end of the day, what you end up having is something that feels almost like a class-based React component, but is also using things like decorators, as you see here, to do things like local state as well as props. So props are properties, and you define them with a decorator. State, you define with a decorator. You can do static CSS with a static property inside of this class, and components are all based on a class. Now, the custom element directive allows you to name and define a component. Now, this syntax is interesting. It is kind of a mashup of many things. In fact, I think maybe people from Angular might look at this the most find it to be the most normal. Maybe if you're coming from this from a React class-based component thing, this would look kind of normal to you as well. Me personally, the syntax is fine. It does feel a little bit tough to read at points, but I'm sure once you get used to it, it's fine. Either way, the reason why lit is so great is because it allows you to do things like this, creating a timer-based application in much less code than writing straight-up web components, which I've done and personally don't love. I love web components. I love the idea of web components, but I've always found the syntax to be not a lot of fun to work in. So why should you choose lit? It is simple, fast, and lightweight. It only costs around 5 kilobytes minified and compressed, so it keeps it nice and small. It's always a good feature, especially in this modern world where we're shipping a ton of JavaScript. The last thing you want to do is ship a big old library with anything you're doing. Now, there's a lot more here in lit, but if we're giving a high-level view of what the heck lit is at a big, broad viewpoint, lit is a library that sits on top of web components to allow you to build components for the web using web components, but a better, nicer, more unified, more structured syntax. A common complaint you'll see with web components is that when you look up how to do anything in web components, there's 10 different approaches because there's a lot of different ways to do it. But with something like lit, you have a little bit more conventions on how to do things. And again, it's all class-based. You have things like directives, and you have things like scoped CSS, easy access to the shadow DOM, events and all sorts of stuff in here. Now, another cool thing is that there is a big community around Lit. Lit is a large community-based project. It has existed for long enough now where there's a lot of people using it, so you'll find a fair amount of resources with Lit. So it's not just like some brand new upstart thing. This is a legitimate tutorial. This is a legitimate project that has been around now for quite a little while, and there's full-on tutorials and a playground and all sorts of stuff. So if you're interested in really ditching maybe a front-end framework for maybe a web component-based framework, Lit might be the one to check out. I'm sure there'll be more of these things in the future, but for now, I think Lit right here is a good choice, especially if you're looking to dive into web components. My actual suggestion, though, would be to look into web components themselves. Perhaps take the Level Up Tutorials course on web development with web components and learn the ins and outs of web components first before diving into something like Lit. That way, when you use Lit, you not only have an appreciation for what it's doing, but you actually get a good understanding of what it's doing for you versus what web components are doing for you themselves. Cool. So this is Lit. Check it out. You can find it on GitHub. You can find it at lit.dev. Again, this isn't sponsored or anything like that. Just a basic what is Lit. So check it out. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.